to episode 9 of Gone Mental. I'm Kristy.
I'm Andrew.
This episode we're going to talk about a subject where we disagree. We're going to talk about smoking and mental illness.
Just briefly, I'm an anti-smoking activist and Kristy is a non-smoker.
So none of us have personal lived experience of smoking, although I'll talk about when I did try a cigarette in a psych hospital. But we'll start from there. Andrew, do you want to explain why you're an anti-smoking activist and why it's so important in mental health?
Well, I was a childhood asthmatic, a chronic asthmatic, so breathing has always been quite a big issue for me. And cigarette smoke was literally life-threatening for me as a child. So yeah, I've always been anti-smoking. I've never seen the point of it. I've never understood it. Smoking rates are very high amongst the mentally ill, particularly people with severe mental illness. I was astounded when I did volunteer in a placement at a day-to-day living centre for people with mental illness. That I think about 90% of the people there smoked, including all of the supervisors too. So no one really even regulated it. There were a couple of people there who really objected to everyone else smoking outside, and I had to raise quite a fuss to get it under control. It was good.
Well, I don't smoke. I did try a cigarette when I was 16 and coughed and didn't like it, but when I was in hospital when I was 22 for 7 weeks, I was so bored out of my mind that I actually tried smoking. It was sort of an activity I could do to stop being bored, but
that's part of the attraction of it, is that it's something to break the boredom, and it gives you a high. I understand the reasons people do it.
So I bought a cigarette for 20 cents off another consumer, and I had 2 puffs, coughed, and said, "I don't like it, you can have it back if you want." Okay, and I'm really grateful because it would have led to a deterioration in my health if I'd started smoking. But I remember how bad it was when I was so bored and smoking suddenly just seemed like an activity to do. I mean, I can't imagine, for most smokers, I think, smoking is sort of an auxiliary activity done with other activities. But for people with mental illness, sometimes it is the highlight of your day. If you're going to be sitting around waiting for a doctor, etc. I have a friend who had given up smoking for 8 years, and then she started smoking again when she was receiving ECT, because electroconvulsive therapy, because she was waiting around for everybody else. She was in a smoking environment because she didn't want to sit by herself while she waited for an appointment. So everybody else smoked.
We're going to talk about this in how to improve psych hospitals, to make them less boring places for staff.
Yeah, that's a vital subject for me, and I think Andrew will have great input on that. So, but I am of the attitude that people with mental illnesses deserve exactly the same rights as everybody else in the community.
Including the right to get lung cancer.
And while everybody else, I shouldn't laugh because cancer is a very serious issue, but well, if everybody else is allowed to smoke, I think that psychiatric patients should be allowed to smoke. And in psych hospitals, often it's become very restricted. Some you can't smoke at all. Some have limited areas where you can smoke.
I think these restrictions are a good thing.
I don't, because it's very easy for somebody who can leave hospital to not smoke on the premises of the hospital. It's very easy when you're sick in bed, but when you're in a psych hospital, you can't leave and you're not sick in bed. I feel that often, when I worked on the official visitors line, and I'll talk about that in another video, the most common call we got was, "I need to smoke, and I need to smoke now." I feel that the last place you want to detox from a cigarette is in a psych ward where you're already under huge amounts of stress.
Well, people were saying that they were refused smoking time absolutely, or just at the time that they wanted to smoke. Was it as clear as that?
Some wards it is absolute. Other wards there's very restrictive spaces. I know that at the forensic ward, Long Bay Forensic Ward, they have 1 square metre for smoking, and that's usually taken up by nurses. Everybody has to line up to stand in the smoking area, except the nurses who can go in whenever they like and push in front of lines. And well, you've got somebody who's waiting 2 hours for a cigarette and somebody else pushes in front of the line, it becomes a very big deal. And again, a forensic ward is a ward for somebody who's got a mental illness and has committed some kind of criminal offence. A very stressful time for anyone. Another area where I don't believe they should be inhibited in their ability to smoke.
Mm-hmm. So inhibited as opposed to controlled, as opposed to regulated. But where are you drawing the line here? Because they are different things.
Because I don't smoke.
Forbidden, inhibited, regulated, restricted, they're all slightly different.
I think it's very important that you've got space free of smoke when you don't smoke, and you may be admitted into a psych ward like me. But I don't see why people can't smoke outside. Most psych wards have a little courtyard, or there could be a room with good ventilation specific for smokers, because I don't think the extra stress is okay, and I don't think that we should have to give up something that other people aren't forced to give up.
So how would you like to see it working ideally? Let's see if we do disagree on this.
Ideally, I don't believe that it's good for consumers to smoke, especially because, and we are talking about smoking cigarettes as opposed to smoking marijuana, which is a whole different episode.
Yes.
Okay? I don't believe it's good for people to smoke cigarettes, especially because it may mean that they need to be on higher amounts of their medications. Antipsychotics and that. Nicotine stops medication being absorbed. Okay?
Yes.
But while it's legal, I believe there should be resources, especially when you're in an inpatient unit, where you can go, where you can smoke at pretty much any time, day or night, because you're there often against your will. For me, this is a human rights issue. If they're holding me against my will, they shouldn't be allowed to stop me doing anything that doesn't harm others and harm myself. Of course, smoking harms myself, but so does inducing more stress on me if I did smoke when I'm locked up.
Right. So how is the system working against this? I mean, obviously there are systemic problems here. But what do you see are the problems that are causing things like this?
I think in general, the hospitals are mostly smoke-free zones now.
They are legally smoke-free zones.
Yeah. And I don't know if you can still smoke in the courtyard of my local hospital, but you used to be able to.
Certainly hope you can.
Okay.
Those places used to be awful.
It is awful, but when 90% of them smoke, I believe that it'd be great if we had 2 separate courtyards so you could have your fresh air and outside time.
That's about the only way you can do it. Apart from safe smoking rooms, which I suppose is a whole other issue. You can pack smokers in and they can smoke as much as they like and they ventilate the room properly. That's very expensive, but that's how they should be doing it.
Yeah, I agree that I don't feel that's fair that you can't go outside if you've got asthma or whatever in a psych ward because the only outdoor space is smoke.
Yes.
But
that's terribly unfair and that's very unhealthy too.
That's also discrimination against people with physical and other disabilities, including asthma.
Yeah, that's right.
But until it's not legal, I want people to be allowed to smoke if they have a mental illness, just the same as anybody else. I don't advocate for smoking, but I advocate for the right to choose. I'm a feminist, and I think the right to choose what goes in our body, including choosing nicotine, while it's legal in this country, should be paramount.
Okay, I'll sketch out the way I think it should work in psych hospitals. Yes, if someone wants to poison themselves, as long as they're not poisoning anyone else, there should be a time where they are escorted to a smoking area if that's needed. They're allowed to smoke, they come back, and they're not causing anyone else health damage or stress, particularly other patients. Now, something like 90% of people with severe mental illness smoke, but there are still a few who don't. They must be protected at all costs. I think my impression of what Kristy has told me about some of the really bad parts of the psych wards is that it tends to be about control. The nurses need to be in control, and that can lead to some serious abuse, physical, mental abuse, of course, and some of that is, okay, we're going to stop these guys doing stuff to control them, and part of it may be things like denying them smoking breaks, or it might be putting, I hope this doesn't happen, but I wouldn't be surprised, non-smoking patients in with smokers. I mean, that would be, I hope that doesn't happen. Unfortunately, I think I've heard stories that it has. So what I'd like to see is a situation where smokers are escorted into an area where no non-smokers have any access at all, and then escorted out. Smokers and non-smokers should not share even outdoor smoking facilities, especially if it's in an enclosed courtyard. As long as those guidelines are adhered to, then yes, okay, if the person has a right to poison themselves, that's fine, as long as they don't poison anyone else. Now, having said that, anyone who is an addicted smoker has mental health, I believe they should be, that part of their treatment should be at least considering counselling for giving up cigarettes. I think that should be a mandatory part of the considered mental health plan. Now, I don't think Kristy agrees with that.
I again am stuck with the right to choose, and I don't believe in criminalising any drugs really. I believe in harm minimisation at all costs. I believe...
I'm not talking about criminalisation.
Yeah, but if we make smoking illegal, and you didn't say that, but I'm saying that that's where it could go. But
oh, I can only hope.
I would hope
that would be the ultimate aim. It's never going to happen.
I would hope that a doctor who cares about your health should be caring more as much about your mental health and your physical health side by side. They're paramountly connected. But what I've seen in psychiatric hospitals before is people wanting to smoke, not being allowed to smoke, acting out, and then being punished, as in put in isolation, given medication to make them go to sleep, and stuff
and
like
probably
that.
Needing more medication
And
than smoking.
Needles, just to quiet them down, because
To give them needles to give the staff control over the patient. That's another aspect of control.
And so I find that that aspect of abuse worries me. On the other hand, I do see a social justice view of wanting people to be able to be as healthy as they can, recognising that psychiatric hospitals, psychiatric patients actually have a 20-year life difference in expectancy. Once you're diagnosed with a mental illness in Australia today, your life expectancy is 20 years less than the general population.
So we haven't got long, viewers. That's why I'm making so many of these videos.
So I think that they should be given patches, counselling,
Everything possible to reduce, yes.
To reduce or ultimately end it for free. But
Very much.
Still for me, I'm going to go back to it's my body and it's my right to do what I want with it.
As long as it is only the particular person's body and not someone else who's being smoked upon, which is the major problem with smoking, is that it affects people around you. Now, I'll just end with what I think is a truly frightening story. This is, non-smokers told me about this. It was only a few years ago. A doctor who was also a psych patient noticed in a psych ward that one day a concerned, I'm not sure if it was a doctor or a nurse, it was a healthcare professional, came in and handed cigarettes to every patient to calm them down. Did not check to see if they were smokers first. That sort of thing happens, and it must not happen.
I'm particularly alarmed about that because if you're very ill at the time,
You can't say no, and you won't say no.
You might not have
It's not
the
informed
ability
consent.
to say no that you would have if you were well.
Here, take this, it's your medicine.
Yeah, you do stuff that you wouldn't do if you were well when you're in hospital, and that story does frighten me. I could imagine that there were times where I was so sick that if somebody gave me a cigarette and told me to smoke it, I
That's right.
smoked it.
And that's about control, and that's about keeping people pacified. Because if you're a smoker, you give them a cigarette, you tend to calm down. But yeah, that sort of things happen in psych hospitals, and they shouldn't. I'll leave you with that disturbing thought.
Thank you very much for listening. Bye. Share us your thoughts.
Yes, let us know what